Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hidden Hockey Podcast. Again, my name is Matt Gordon. If you're new to the channel, please do yourself a favor and hopefully you enjoy the stream. You decide to go ahead and subscribe. It'd be really appreciated if you do. That being said, I'm going to talk today about the 2026 NHL draft class and go over my top 32 across a variety of different countries, different prospects from different leagues and things like that. Give my breakdown of the top 32 that I currently have, and I'll give an overall synopsis of what I think the draft's going to be going into this year and the intriguing draft season that is to be the 2025-2026 season. Again, if you have any questions during this stream at all, you come in at any point in time and want to leave a question, do yourself a favor, leave it on the right-hand side. I have the live chat over, so I will answer questions towards the end if there are any. Otherwise, I'm just going to go ahead and break down exactly what I think of this 2026 draft class. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pull up my top 32. Give a small shill ad for the Elite Prospects mock draft builder because it's awesome. I love their ranking portal. They do an unbelievable job, and no, they did not pay me to do this. I wish they would, though. So let me go ahead and present here. I'm going to share my screen so you guys can see my rank. I am going to review a little bit, but that's okay. Not a big deal. So I will go ahead and dive into the various picks here, what I think will happen going into this year's draft. So maybe to start, I want to say that the draft this year is really intriguing. I think there is a lot of really good players, especially defensemen. I don't have as much of a rank in my first round, but I think there's 12 to 15 really impact defensemen that can, by what I mean by impact is anybody who can fit into a top 6 role. I think there's about 12 or 15 guys that right now in their current projection before the season even starts, I can see them playing NHL minutes within 3 to 4 years. I think there's a really talented group of forwards, especially from Russia. I think Russia this year has a very, very impressive draft class. Obviously the U.S. and Canada always put up a lot of great talents as well. Sweden, I think, has an above average class this year. Finland has a little bit of a bump up from last year. I have one guy in my first round from Finland. You can see right there, as well as a couple other guys that are ranked in my second and third rounds. And I'm just really excited to see what kind of players are going to come out of this year's draft. There's a lot of non-traditional hockey countries as well that may be represented, depending on how you define non-traditional hockey countries. But, it'll be really interesting to see how this class develops. As far as what I think about the class as a whole, I think there's a ton of depth. I think there is a really good amount of players that at least are NHL minimum quality players, given at their ultimate upsides. Last year at this time, I think I had about 120 players ranked. This year I have about 175. So I think there is going to be, obviously I have drop-offs. Last year I dropped down to about 50 that I had in my personal rank. This year I'm expecting to be probably closer to 75, 80 by the time the draft hits. But I really like the overall quality of this draft. I think the big standouts are the Russians. There's a great Russian 08 class this year. I think the defensive class this year is some pretty high-end defenders that some of them are in the first round. Some of them are just outside my first round. And some of them may be late-round risers that come up into the first-round discussion by the time the draft hits. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump in. So number 32, I have Dylan Rossi, or Rosie, maybe, depending on how you pronounce it. I've never heard his name actually sounded out. But the lone QMJHL player I have in my ranking in the first round. This is a kid who's a very impactful player, did really well in the Quebec, midget circuit, and has come into the QMJHL, played for a St. John Sea Dogs team that didn't necessarily have the most talent around him. He was a big minus player, unfortunately, adjusting to the QMJHL and having it be his rookie year. He definitely put up points, but also struggled defensively. So there's a lot of work to be done there. But the overall upside and the great potential that Dylan Rossi has is beyond compare. I think he's a really, really talented player. I could see him slotting into the top 20 should he have a good year. I think he may have a similar upside to an Emil Guite. Emil Guite is a guy who I think could be really, he was a guy who I had really high going into this year or going into 2025, and he obviously fell into the 4th or 5th round. But Dylan Rossi is a guy who's smaller player, good shot. Somebody who skating needs a little bit of work. He's a good skater, but I don't think he's somebody who I would consider a pro-ready skater yet. So that's something he's going to have to develop throughout the year, as well as finding himself more comfortable and more consistent in the scoring. But they're a really good package there with Dylan Rossi. 31, similar situation developmentally, but Colin Fitzgerald for the Peterborough Petes. Colin is a guy who's a really high-end prospect. Originally was drafted very highly in the OHL draft a couple years ago. Played for Peterborough this last year and, had a really, really bad development situation. Peterborough was the worst team in the OHL. Clearly did not have a team that really gelled very well, and he was put and thrust into a really awkward development environment. But I thought he was very impressive considering the fact that he was in such a weird environment as a team. With Colin, you get a good all-around player, somebody who is a good 200-foot player, I think one of the better defensive forwards out of this grouping of players here. But he really has a lot of projectable attributes, and somebody who I have a lot of time for. Good frame already at 6'2" and 194. If he can get to about 205, I think that'll be when he's kind of ready to either finish the OHL or move on to the pro ranks. I think that would be, him having 10 pounds of good solid muscle will help his game immensely. And I think the offense is still yet to be tapped into in the OHL level. I think there's some, you're expecting him to maybe be, a 50, 60-point player this year. And I think he'll be somebody who, in the best circumstances, maybe an 80-point scorer this year and somebody who's really thought of in Peterborough. But given his development situation last year, given what that team is trying to do and trying to develop, he's a part of a good young core that might be good in a couple of years. So hopefully there's a real solid progression within his game. Number 30, I have Logan Howery, another OHL product, playing for London this year. Got some time in London last year. Obviously, London was a very loaded team. They went on to win the Memorial Cup, and Logan found himself playing, I think, 35 games last year, somewhere in that range, and struggled a little bit initially in the OHL. I think with the ability to develop the GOJ level and Junior B will be something that he found incredibly crucial. And I think it's something that, with a really solid team next year, the potential of another guy on our list potentially landing with the London Knights. We'll talk about it when he gets to that point. But there's a ton of talent that's still there. They're likely losing Dickinson. They're likely losing Cowan. They're losing a lot of, really talented players that in Casper Haltonen, another one. And a lot of that scoring is leaving their team. So, Howery's got a real opportunity here to do well developmentally. Like I said, I think he only had like 10 or 15 points last year, but the upside is really high with him. I think he'll be a guy who is a big-time riser this year. He'll find his draft stock jumping up quite a bit. And, overall, a really good forward as well. I think defensively he's okay. I think there's some more work to be done there, but being coached by the Hunters, they'll be able to coach out of him. He seems like a very coachable kid. A lot to like there with Logan Howery. Number 29, we got Oliver's Merniques playing for Sioux City in the USHL. A younger guy in the birth year, already got some World Junior experience, was a part of the team that shocked Canada in Latvia. And, one of the best Latvian prospects out of the 08 class, in my opinion. There's a few more that are in 27 that I think could be potentially around his range. But Oliver's is a guy who's a solid 200-foot player. Good all around. I think his shot could use some improvement. I don't know that he's necessarily got the most elite shot out there. He's still got to work on getting a little bit stronger as well. But the overall game and the smart hockey IQ this kid possesses is why he's listed in the first round here for me at 29. I think he's somebody who at the USHL level did really well to acquit himself as a rookie. I think there's a lot of opportunity for him to grow in a really good development environment in Sioux City. Sioux City has gone on to develop a lot of different D1 players as well as some NHL prospects as well. And, it's a really good situation for Oliver's. He's a guy who is really good on the forecheck. I think he's very relentless on, getting pucks in the corners. Isn't necessarily a rough him up type guy, but he's very smart when he, where he picks his puck battles, how he approaches those puck battles, and ultimately how he puck retrieves. I think he's one of the better puck retrievers in this draft. 28 here, we got Leon Kolarek, an Austrian-born player who also has some World Junior experience as well. I think he played at the D1A level last year. With Leon Kolarek, you have a kid who, a late born 07, was 8 days away from being draft eligible last year. This is a guy who's played pro level hockey already in the Austrian League or the Alps Hockey League. Has gone on and done really well. Did well at the 1A level in the World Juniors. I believe he was over a point per game, if not almost 2 points per game at the D1A level, one of the top scorers. This is a kid who is very easily acclimated to a very offensive game. I think a lot of people look at him similarly to, somebody like a Marco Rossi. Not anybody who, you're loving the defensive game from him, but I think his offensive game is really impressive. I don't think he's got the pedigree that Rossi had coming into his draft year, but he's somebody who I think should get a lot of looks. I think he will be a guy that, more people will put in their first rounds. I think I'm on the outside right now looking at Leon Kolarek in terms of a first rounder. A lot of people probably have him closer to the middle of the second, if not late second, just because of the uncertainty of the Austrians. But I think there's a real good opportunity for him. He's playing in a good program with Red Bull. They've developed some guys over the years, namely JJ Peterka. I think they've had a couple other guys that have come over and played in North America and done pretty well. Not necessarily made the NHL, but they've developed very nicely. Hakan Hanelt is another guy that I can think of right now that played for the Red Bull Hockey Academy. But there's just a ton of players that have gone on through that program to develop really nicely. And despite it being a younger program, they've really done well developmentally. So Leon Kolarek is a guy who, he might have the opportunity to maybe even come to North America at some point. I don't know that he'll do that in his draft year, but I think after his draft year, the NHL team that picks him will want to get him over to North America, in my opinion. I just have a feeling that's going to be the way it goes for him. But Leon is a really good player, great skater. I think he's somebody who offensively still has some more to give, but he's shown really well at all levels. And don't be surprised if he's able to play pretty well and be almost a half a point, if not 3/4 of a point per game at the Alps Hockey League level. Somebody who should definitely be in a lot of first rounds. Surprised he's not anymore. Blake Zielinski, another guy here, Des Moines Buccaneers player from the USHL. American kid. He played through the Philly Junior Flyers program. Somebody who, to me, I think showed himself really well at certain points in the USHL level. He had his flashes where he was one of the best players on the ice whenever I would watch him play. I've only caught maybe 2 or 3 viewings of him personally, but in those viewings, I never came away disappointed from his game or his play, despite the fact he was 16 years old at the time. I think there's a lot of skill with him. I think he's somebody who, could really round out all parts of his game. But a decent frame here, 5'11", 183 pounds. I think there's some more growth even still within him, physically. Seems a little bit underdeveloped, but, is enough to handle the USHL rigor. With him, he's somebody who tends to be a very clutch goal scorer as well. Finds that, the moments that he has in pressure, he's able to do really well, out there in the USHL level. I would expect him to be an impact player this year, probably close to a point per game. And somebody who I think a lot of people are sleeping on right now. He should definitely be on the fringe of the first round, if not in people's first rounds, which is why I have him here. Alex McLean here at 26. The Guelph Storm have him. Another younger player, actually very similar age to, Oliver Smerniks and the guy who I'm going to talk about next. But, 5'10", $174, a little bit slight of frame. But this is a kid with all-world skill. Skating could be a little bit improved, but not to the point where he's deficient in the OHL level. You're going to get him more strong, more development time for him. He'll be a guy who probably takes 2 or 3 years to really become the player he wants to be. But I think the offensive creativity is there. I think he's somebody who, you have a lot of time for developmentally. I think he, despite the fact he's 5'10", he's not somebody who's soft by any means. I think he's able to handle contact very well. And, to me, I thought he was somebody who I debated even putting in my second round, but I just felt like with the players that I had below him, I was more inclined to put him ahead of those players, which is why I have him at 26. At this point, I have kind of a divide from the rest of them in terms of this is my next tier of prospect. Ilya Morozov here at 25, Tri-City Storm USHL this year, was a rookie this year. You look at his elite prospects profile; it's very barren. He's only got 3 years of actual statistics within elite prospects, and that's very rare to find within somebody's draft year. But it's, this is a player who is very raw. You watch his skating; he's not the most fleet of foot, but you look at him; he's a massive human being, 6'3", almost 200 pounds already. Another year of growth still ahead of him. There's a ton to like with this kid. He's still 16 years old as of this recording. He turns 17 next week. Watching the clips of him as a 16-year-old, I saw a kid who looked incredibly raw, great physical frame. I thought his overall skill set was something that was really fun to watch. Very good at getting in front of the net and managing his space in front. I'm not afraid to get to the dirty areas at all. I think he stands to be a little bit more creative in the offensive zone. I think there's times where he's too willing to be the passenger as opposed to being a guy who, can clearly put up points. Somebody who I think, again, is super raw. I really like how, his growth and his development has really come through. Didn't necessarily play an elite program either in Russia. I thought he was somebody who has really developed himself very nicely. He's due to play NCAA hockey as well. He's going to play at Miami of Ohio in a couple years. And, just a ton to like with him. I think he's just a really gifted and talented player. I'm expecting a big development curve for him, especially if he grows into his frame a little bit more. But somebody who I think, I have a lot of time for, definitely a raw type prospect. And somebody that, you want to track over the course of the year. I think he's going to show real rapid development very quickly within the USHL. 24 here, I got Philip Novak. This is a guy who could potentially come to the Western Hockey League. Kelowna drafted him in the CHL import draft. I believe this year's draft he was selected. 6'2" and 200 pounds. This kid, when I watch the clips of him, I haven't caught a full game of his yet, but I watch clips of him and I think a lot about Thomas Hertl. I just think there's a lot of very similar attributes to when Hertl was younger. Hertl was a guy who I think acclimated to the pro game really nicely, despite the fact that he was still a little bit raw. I expect that Philip Novak, should he decide to play at the pro rank, be able to do the same thing. I think there is a real likelihood that he, if he's not getting the time and situations that he would like to see this year in Sparta Praha, I think he will either bolt at some point during the World Juniors or may come over to the Western League in Kelowna at some point in time. There is an opportunity for him to come before the season. I'm not saying that that's not possible, but I'm inclined to think he's going to stay in check for the time being. I haven't heard anything to the contrary. If you guys have heard anything to the contrary, leave it in the comments. I'd be interested to, maybe you've caught something that I haven't. This past year, he didn't really play in a ton of games. He only had about 24 games 21 games. I'm looking at his stats right now. He had 21 games last year. At the U17 level, he played at the U20 level and did pretty well. And then also played for the Czech under-17 team in international tournaments. Again, injury bug got him. I think a lot more people would know who he is had he had a full season. And I think a lot more people would have this kid in their first round. So he's one of those guys who I think could be a real riser amongst the public scouts as well as people in the industry. Going now to another, this is a personal favorite of mine, Nicholas Aram-Olsson, playing for Orebro at the U20 level. This kid is terrific. He is somebody who I debated even putting in my top 20, if not putting in my top 15. All around, really solid player. Has been very impactful, already got some World Junior experience, and I thought acquitted himself very nicely at the World Juniors, mind you. Also played well at the U18s this year. Just an all-around really savvy hockey player, very smart, has dominated in Norway for a very long time. Came over to Sweden, in his 15-year-old year, was, easily acclimating to the NHL level, not the NHL, easily acclimating to the Swedish junior system. Somebody who had really rapid development this year. He went from, in his 15-year-old year, 7 points at the, JAT national level to being a point per game player at the U20 level. just a really very skilled hockey player. Was one of the top scoring 08s. Up there with the likes of Viggo Bork, up there with the likes of Anton Frendel and some other guys. Actually outscored Frendel, which speaks to how good of a quality player he is. 6 foot, 183 pounds. The only thing I could say about this kid is I think he could stand to be a little more consistent in his effort level. I think there's a really good hockey player when he's super engaged and ready to go. But I think there's some raw ability still here that needs to be untapped. I love this kid's game though. Really crafty player, great stick, one of the better stick handlers in this draft actually. Offensively very inclined. Any development staff would be super happy to get this kid because I think he's somebody who, despite the fact he's not super engaged out there all the time, I think he's a really hard worker. When he's ready and playing the way he should be, he's very, very good in corners, very good at puck retrievals, very good at managing the situation. Somebody you can put in your power play. He's got so many utilizations within his game that I think he's going to be super projectable. I'm inclined to think he's going to get some pro minutes this year too, just because of how advanced he is as a player. Just a lot to like with him. And he's got a younger brother in William Armolson who, is a 2028 draft eligible, who is also super impressive as well and is following a similar development path to Nicholas. But all the time in the world for Armolson, I think he's a guy who will shoot up a lot of people's boards, especially if he has a very good year, again, at the under 20 level. Should he get some Swedish Hockey League minutes and play for Orebro on their top team, I think there is a ton to like with this kid. I think he'll be somebody who immediately injects himself into this third or fourth line of any team he plays for, but there's a lot to like with Nicholas Armolson. 22, Carson Corrales. I debated putting Carson a little bit higher. I have him a little bit lower than the public scouting community has him, but it's mainly because I liked a lot of the players ahead of him. That's not a slight to Carson at all. I really like Carson's game. One of the better, puck movers in this entire draft. Somebody who definitely is going to fit in on a top pairing somewhere in a really good development situation. I think, he's going to be a key factor for Prince George this year. I'm expecting a lot of progression from him. Didn't necessarily have the best under 18s, which also led me to not put him higher. But I've seen this kid play for a very long time. I watched him a couple years ago for the first time ever at the Pilot Mound Academy at the U15 level. Watching his team getting absolutely slaughtered 8-1 by, I believe it was Delta at the time. And, Carson Corrales was the best player off of both teams, despite the fact their team got smashed. Like, this kid was just an unbelievable puck mover, really good skater. Gap control was excellent, even at 15 at the time. Really good overall skill and skating. I think he's super, super smart in terms of how he picks his spots. Really good with his stick and managing, passing lanes and blocking situations and different things like that. And then you watch his overall ability and skill, and there's just a lot to like with Carson Corrales. I think he's, again, a super projectable guy. I look at him similarly to a Cameron Reed. I think he's a little bit better than Cameron Reed was, but a nice player to have in your system. I think he's somebody who could show himself to be a point per game defenseman and somebody who I would expect, along with another guy that we'll talk about in a minute, one of the better 08s in in the Western Hockey League. Just a ton to like with Carson Corrales. I think he's somebody who scouts will fall in love with very quickly. The next player on my list here, we got Oscar Holmertz, playing for Linköping in the J under 20 level for, the U20 national level. Similar to Armolson, in terms of their production, nearly a point per game guys. Also had some rapid development paths for them as well. Every level where this kid's play at, he scored. He's more of a playmaker, but he finds opportunities to score as well. I think he defers to the pass maybe a little too much. I think he's a very skilled player and somebody who could be a really interesting player to watch growing this year. I think, the Swedish class this year is very, very good at the high end level. I think he's somebody who right now he slots in where I have him, but a team could really fall in love with him and put him in their top 15. I wouldn't be surprised to see that. With Oscar, you get a guy who offensively, again, very inclined, really good playmaker. I think one of the better passers out of this group of players in this draft, in the draft. He's slotted right now by a lot of people, somewhere in the 20s. I'm a little bit higher on him, I think, than the average, viewer is or person that watches him play is. But he's been a point per game player at every level he's played at. He's been, somebody who I think, is able to score in a bunch of different ways. He's not just a greasy goal guy. He can sometimes skill himself into goals. He can create plays for his teammates. He's able to also, be a guy who could be a bumper on a power play. Just brings a lot of really impressive attributes to his game. And he plays a very advanced game despite being, a younger player. So with Oscar, again, a player that I think appropriately is ranked here, but he could be a guy that could rise, pretty quickly as well. Next up is JP Hurlburt, another player who, to me, I thought really struggled to start the year last year, but found his game really nicely in the latter half of the year. Was one of the better players in the development program at the U17s. At the U17 level. I think he, was able to really overcome some deficiencies in his game. I think coming from the Dale Stars elite program, he was so used to scoring in bunches. He was used to being the best player out there. And, he got very humbled very quickly at the U17 level. There were some, stretches he had, during his season last year where he would go 10, 12 games with 1 or 2 points. And then when he found his groove in the last 20, 30 games of the year, he was over a point per game. Was constantly flashing skill, has a good shot. Skating got better as the year went on. This is a guy who he's going to go to a really good program in the University of Michigan in 26-27. I expect him to have a really impactful year here in the USHL. I would expect him to be one of the leading scorers of the USHL if possible. Just really good overall skill, a definite, offensive juggernaut. He can, really bring the puck handling, not afraid to pull off, unconventional moves like the Michigan or, dangle between two guys and toe drag around them in certain situations. I think there's a lot to like with JP Hurlburt. And should he be able to match his upside here, I think he's a guy who I think can appropriately slot himself in the first round. I'm a little more bullish in watching him. That I see a lot of really good overall potential with JP Hurlburt. And I'm curious to get more. I have a couple viewings on him, but I want to get more viewings on him this year. So now we're going to go on to another Oscar that came up on the list here, and Oscar Hemming. He's Emil Hemming's brother who was drafted by the Dallas Stars. Another raw player, 6'4", 185 pounds. When you watch him skate, he's kind of like Gumby out there. He's not the most fleet of foot. But, he's given time. I think he needs to grow into his body a little bit. Another very raw prospect. There starts to be a theme here in this part of the class where a lot of really raw, super projectable players that, given the right development opportunities and using the frames that they need to, I think they're going to be very impactful players at the National Hockey League level. This is a kid who, I think last year had his moments, was super dominant at the U18 level, but, at the U20 level in Finland, he was just okay. I don't think he really brought everything he could have at that level. I think he, was still learning the game a lot within his level. I don't think he'll be a guy this year that I'm expecting to get minutes in Liga. Should he get those minutes in Liga, I think he will be somebody who probably will find himself where I have him now. For me, he may move up depending on the quality of the players ahead of him. But with Oscar, again, another raw project player, somebody who, can use his frame and I think could stand to be a little more physical out there. Not necessarily soft by any means, but doesn't really use his body to his advantage as much as he should. I think he could work on shielding pucks. In the clips I've seen of him, I think the goals he scores, he's very perimeter. I think he needs to grow into his body a little bit. I think he's somebody who, if he struggles in Finland again this year, he could see himself move to North America, just to get used to the North American ice as well as just getting used to being in a really high-end environment. Kitchener is the team that selected him this past year in the first round of the CHL import draft. That would be a really good development situation for him. They've worked very well with Europeans. See Landeskog. They've had Philip Machar. They've had a few other guys that have played in Kitchener and really enjoyed their time there. Mikhail Boddicker, I believe, is another player that played for the Kitchener Rangers. This is a kid who I think would fit really well. And again, a younger player in the class, somebody who's a month away from basically being a part of the 27 class. So, if you put stock in that kind of stuff, he's a guy who you could buy high on because I think he has a lot more roundup time to get to where he can truly be. Going now to 18, you got Marcus Nordmark's the next pick here. Marcus is a real opportunity to either system he plays in, whether it's Djurgårdens or he could potentially play for the London Knights. Really good player. This is a kid, again, similar to Oscar Holmartz, has been super elite at every level he's played at. Was one of the better players in TV Puckin a few years ago. Should be a guy who I think could find himself either getting out of the U20 level in Sweden or being a really impactful player for the London Knights at the OHL. Good all-around player. I think his shot is one of the better shots out of this grouping of players in the draft. I would say he's probably a top 10 shot in the draft. Overall, really solid game. Somebody who, I think there's more to give with him as well. He's not raw by any means, but I think he's still got some finishing school to, put through. And I think there's more goal scoring than, a lot of people think there really is out of him. I think he gets perceived too much as a setup guy, but I think he's able to create his own offense when he needs to. Defensively, I think he's very good. I think he's somebody who, is kind of your typical Swedish 200-foot player, really responsible in both ends of the ice, makes sure he hits his assignments and does everything he needs to do to be successful. Just somebody who, I have a lot of time for in terms of watching him develop and grow. I think there's just a lot to like with Marcus Nordmark. This is a raw prospect here in Gleb Pugachev. He's listed there as playing in the KHL level. If he gets KHL minutes, he might shoot into the top 10. This is a kid who I think a lot of scouts, if they're not afraid of the Russian factor, there's going to be some polarization. He could be seen as somebody who could be in the top 10. He could also be seen as a guy who could fall out of the first round just because he's Russian. I don't know how committed he is to North America. I would assume he's probably pretty committed. He's a Russian, Kazakhstani dual national, was born in Kazakhstan, but, chose to represent Russia internationally. He does not have any North American rights for juniors. So, part of me wonders if, he's going to play the long game in Russia. He might find himself, choosing that path instead. He'll be an interesting player to watch, but you watch the overall skill and size and speed package that this kid has, and it's hard not to rank him very aggressively here. I think he's somebody who, I have a lot of time for. I think he's a very, very gifted hockey player. Somebody who's an absolute beast in all zones, very physical, very much a power forward, one of the better power forward types in this draft. I put him up here with some of the elite guys I'm going to talk about next. Guys like Belchets, guys like, Ryan Rubrick, those kind of players. I think he's just a step below those players, which is why I have him ranked here. But with Pugachev, I got a ton of time for anybody who, can watch this kid play. I think a lot of people can diagnose him to have, a very intriguing power forward game, and still needs to grow a little bit. I think if he can get to 220, keep the skill and size that he has, and keep, some sort of offensive ability, he's going to be really, really highly sought after in this draft. Going now to 16, and we got Chase Harrington, another kid who I caught really young as well. Caught him when he played. Actually, was in the same game that, Carson Krells was in the game I watched, and I've caught a few viewings of him since, but it was Carson Krells who's the best player in that game, and then Chase Harrington was also a very impactful player in that game as well. And then watching him in the Western Hockey League for Spokane, I think he has become a really impressive offensive player. Showed really well in the playoffs this past year. They had a really deep run, 14 points in 20 games for Spokane. Thought he was one of the more impactful players for Spokane, despite the fact he was 16 years old. A ton of time for a player like him. He's going to be turning 18 very early on in the year, one of the older players in this draft class, but somebody who I think is a very, very skilled hockey player. A little bit, at times I think he defers, again, too much to the pass. I think he's got a better shot than he even realizes. Another really good 200-foot player. Details are very impressive in his game. Skating is, I would say, above average. I wouldn't say it's elite by any means, but I think he's an above average skater at the Western Hockey League level. Probably could use a little bit more of a burst, but, isn't necessarily a slow burner. Chase is a guy who, I think is going to have some rapid development here. He could be an 80, 90-point guy, and I think that's why I have him slated here, is because if he achieves that upside and achieves where he wants to be, especially having really talented teammates. We're going to talk about Mathis Preston in a little bit. There's a really good team in Spokane. I think he could find himself really acclimating to being a really high-end player in the Western Hockey League. Now we're going to go into 15, and we got Cooper Williams, another Western Hockey League player. With Cooper, you have a very, very skilled hockey player, somebody who I caught on a little bit later than a lot of these players have caught on in the draft class. I only really knew about him for, the last 18 months or so. But in watching Cooper Williams this year, I thought he was somebody who really turned from being just another average Western Hockey League player to somebody who is one of the higher offensive talents in this class. Somebody who, again, has really shown it at the, the Western Hockey League level, and he's so raw physically. He's only 150 pounds at 6 foot. Still looks like he's like 15 years old. Gonna go to North Dakota. Somebody who I think needs a few years in the Western Hockey League just to acclimate. 57 points in 68 games last year, which is not very common in the Western Hockey League, especially with the class that's been in the 07s and the 08s. They're in a very strong Western Hockey League, and it's fun to watch his growth and development. I think he, to me, there's still a lot more to give with him. I think there's a lot more that you can see out of him as a player. And, I'm just really, really intrigued by him. I think there's, a lot of people that when you love them, you really love them. I think he could be, similar to like a Ben Kindle. I think he's in that ilk. He's even like an Andrew Crystal, has a lot of offensive flair. I don't think he's somebody who ignores defense like Crystal, but I think he could use some work defensively. But with Cooper, though, there's a really intriguing package here, and you hope he stays consistent, because if he does, he's going to fall in this range. Mikey Burchild next here. This is my top-ranked American kid. This is a guy who has been top of the OA class for a while now. As far as Americans go, played for Shattuck St. Mary, jumped from the U14 to the prep level very quickly, and then became a really high-end player for the prep level as well. That led him getting into the national development program and being a super impactful player. He played in the U17 team, was clearly the best U17 player, got to move up into the U18 level and played really well there too. I would expect him to be the de facto leader in this U18 team. Might even find himself in the World Junior conversation, depending on guys who either are injured or maybe don't accept the invitation. He's somebody who, he played really well at the U18 level. USHL this year, he struggled a little bit at the USHL level, but, overall watching his games and when he played amongst his age group, he was really impressive. Still a lot of growth here in this player. I think he's somebody who, again, another player who isn't necessarily the biggest guy in the world. He's 5'7" and 170 pounds, 5'9", and 170 pounds. You can look at him and say, is he too small? I don't know that he is. I think he plays above his size. I think there's a lot of growth still in his game. And, with Mikey, you're going to want him to be somebody who leads your power play. Probably going to be the really good winger you're going to want, coming in and hitting the pass for a stretch down and, him just deking out a defenseman or two and scoring a goal. He's somebody who can create his own offense. He can, he's got a little bit of game-breaking talent. I wouldn't call him a total game breaker, but, one or two times a game, you're going to find a really flashy moment from Mikey Burchild. And, I think he's somebody who, still has, some more to give. Just really, really like his game. I'm going to go ahead and one sec, guys. I'm going to go ahead and put some light on real quick because it's a little dark in here. Go ahead and flash the light here. Raining in my neck of the woods, so I apologize. But let me go ahead here. So now we're going on to Alessandro Diorio. Sarnia Sting. I expect to get a lot of viewings of him live this year. I'm only 45 minutes from Sarnia, where I live. So, with Alessandro Diorio, this is a guy who, again, a little bit lower ranked, didn't play on the strongest team last year. But I think this year they got a really good squad. Somebody who was really good for the Vaughan Kings when he played and was a really high-end player at that time. And I don't think he's really found his game that he used to have in the U16 level in the minor midget loop. He should find himself more able to produce offense this year. With Diorio, there's some rawness to him still. I think he isn't necessarily as confident as he should be in his game. I think there's a lot more ability that he doesn't showcase on a regular basis. I did debate putting him a little bit lower. I left him here because I really liked the early viewings I got of him, especially at the OHL level. I thought he acclimated very nicely initially to the OHL level, and then he kind of had some ups and downs. So with Diorio, I think, should he find his game again and find where he's able to be super impactful and be one of the more offensively gifted players for Sarnia, I would probably leave him here. And if I don't see that progression or I see a little bit of a downturn, he could be a guy who might be a faller going into the rest of this year's class in the draft. 12 here, we got Mathis Preston. This is one of the better shots in the draft. Mathis is a guy who he can beat you in a lot of different ways. He can beat you with a shot. He can beat you offensively, just by being creative. He can make a move around two or three guys. He can pass the puck over to somebody else once he's making the move to two or three guys. Is able to shift around defensemen pretty decently and easily. Edge work is very impressive. I think the skating, he could use a half more step more. I think he'd be that much more lethal if he had it. Power play merchant, somebody who I have a ton of time for. You set up his wrister on the right-hand side and he'll put it through. Again, Spokane had a really deep run this year. I thought he was super impressive in watching him play. And, I think he's somebody who, again, had a ton of time for him watching him this year. 23 goals in 54 games is nothing to shake your head at. I would expect he could be a 30 to 35 goal scorer this year. It should be really fun to see what he's able to do going forward into the rest of this year. And, with him and Chase Harrington, I think two of those guys that could really bring some good overall skill and potential. A lot to like there with Mathis Preston. And, I'm very excited to watch him and Chase Harrington come together and become really, really good, either line mates or be able to really impact Spokane in a way that leads them to the Memorial Cup, hopefully. We move on now to Brady Wasselin. This is a kid who he's listed here at Boston University. He's likely going to play for Niagara this year and then probably go to Boston University the year after. I think you look at a player like him, he's super physically developed already. He's 5'11" and 190 pounds, but he's just solid muscle. Good overall skating and good straight line skating. Offensively, very gifted. I think a little bit too inconsistent though. I expected him to score a little bit more in a 16-year-old year. He was somebody who, to me, I think can will through people quite easily at his age. And, I think you have to be able to do a little bit more than just will through people to score goals at the pro level. I think, 8 goals in 62 games was something last year I was kind of shocked by. Him to go to college this year would be a very bad developmental decision, in my opinion. I think he's somebody who clearly needs a lot more time in the OHL and be able to play with a guy like Ryan Rubrick, who we're going to talk about in a little bit. Niagara is a team that I thought was really good last year, very shockingly good last year. So have the opportunity to get into a system and a group of players that you can really develop around and maybe make a playoff run with, I think is a lot more suited for his development cycle. I think he could really use some time to dominate the OHL before he goes to the NCAA. Boston University will always be there. He'll find his opportunities, in the OHL, but he's a guy who I think needs to be a little bit more demonstrative. You can will through people and be physical, and that's a great attribute of his, but he's still got to find his scoring touch a little bit more. I'm surprised he struggled as much as he did at the junior level. Skill is something he could use a little bit more of, but when he's engaged and when he's playing with everything at the right pace and the right timing and the right physicality, he's an absolute force. So that's why I have him aggressively ranked here. Teams really like him as well. He'll be a very polarizing guy. He'll either be in the top 10 for some people, or he could be a late first round pick for a lot of people. But I'm on the former, not the latter, and I think he's a guy who should be flirting with the top 10. Victor Fyodoff here at 10, my top ranked Russian, playing at the MHL level this year. Last year, he played at the MHL level for the first time and was super, super impressive to watch. This is a kid with oodles of skill. Not the biggest kid in the world, only 5'10", and $175. I think there's more development in his game. I think his skating is actually super impressive. He's a really strong skater, not anybody who's fast though. I think the speed will come once he physically develops a little bit more. But you watch him, he's very technically proficient as a skater. I think he, is very impressive in terms of his hand skills. I think he's one of the better, stick handling and tight players in this draft. You can put him in a corner and he'll find a way to get out just by being smart and creative. Very efficient as a hockey player as well. Not a lot of wasted energy with him. He's just very smart and reads his assignments very well, and also just knows how to score goals. Gets themselves in the right positions, doesn't waste his time. A lot of attributes that will never not translate at any level you play at. I think he exhibits a lot of really positive traits to becoming a very high-end hockey player. So I have him ranked at 10 for those reasons. Elton Hermansen here at 9. I had him initially very early on at like 5, like a year ago. He's fallen a little bit for me because I do see a little bit of limitations within his game in terms of becoming a truly elite hockey player. But this is a guy who is in the Hall of Very Good. I think he's somebody who you watch him play. I think there is a ton to like with his game. I think there is a lot of, impressive attributes that he exhibits. I think he can, I think he's got a little bit bigger. He's listed here at 6'1", but recent clips have caught of him. He's probably closer to 6'2". A little bit raw still, but a great shifty skater. Not anybody who's going to deke you out of your pants, but he finds really good positions all the time. All around really good player as well. He's very responsible defensively, good at blocking passing lanes. Is able to really manage himself well on a rink. He doesn't have to be coached a ton. He's just somebody who's got some good natural instincts. But I think he could stand to be a little more dominant at the U20 level. That's going to be his goal this year. I think in order to maintain a top 10 position, I think, as long as he's able to get to a point per half per game at the U20 level and maybe get himself some SHL minutes for Moto, I think he could find a lot of really intriguing opportunities for himself developmentally. And Moto, I think, plays for the Allsvenskens, so I think he will get some time at that level, and I think it's a better level for him personally. Ryan Lynn here at 8. Ryan Lynn is a guy who, I caught him when he was younger with the Burnaby Winter Club. Again, another guy similar to Carson Krells. I think he just does everything Carson Krells does a little bit better than him. You're really fast skater, good straight line skater, very efficient, good on his edges, doesn't look awkward skating. a good puck mover, somebody who can, run the power play really nicely. Shots get through with him. He doesn't have the hardest shot in the world, but he's very good at placing. He's somebody who you're not going to want him to check out of his mind by any means, but, he's got some good overall shiftiness and skill, and he will find himself very favorable to the Western Hockey League level. He already has, but I think he'll be a really high-end player, somebody who I think could be leaned on a lot at the U18s this upcoming year. For Canada, I would expect him to be, really high-end, and should find himself an important factor in that, in that tournament. But another guy just offensively very creative, good passer. I've talked a lot about him, so I think I've never caught a viewing of him where I didn't love his game. And that's why I have him ranked here at 8. And I think a lot of people feel the same way about him. Tynan Lawrence here at 7 for the Muskegon Lumberjacks in the USHL. He just told Chicoutimi that he was not going to play in the QMJHL. He's sticking with his commitment to Muskegon. I like that. I think in a time where a lot of people are backing up on the USHL, he's doubling down. And I think that speaks to his confidence within Muskegon, as well as for his ability to develop. He's able to develop in any situation. Has been very fortunate in decisions he's made developmentally. He's another guy who could go to Boston University in a couple of years. He's taking a little bit more of a longer path to Boston University than a Brady Wasselin is reported to be taking. Again, a kid who's a little bit more raw, but the skill is electric. I think he's one of the best skaters in this draft. Great accelerator, good with, good, not only having the good acceleration, but he's very good at making high-end plays at top speed. He blows by you and he thinks by you very quickly. And, got a really good run here in the USHL. And I think he actually led the USHL in playoff scoring and, got himself a championship. It was one of the key factors for why Muskegon won the championship, just because of his offensive creativity and his ability. Tynan Lawrence, I think there's just a lot to like here. I think there's really a lot of pro projectability. It's just a matter of waiting for him to physically develop and, keeping his skills sharp. And that's pretty much it with Tynan Lawrence. 6 here, I got Ryan Rubrick. I've caught 2 different versions of Ryan Rubrick. I've caught the really skilled, super talented player that everybody loves to watch. And then I've caught the non-engaging, you can't see him if he doesn't score kind of Ryan Rubrick. I look at him, and the first thing I thought when I saw this kid was Johan Franzen. I just see a ton of Johan Franzen in him. Good shot, great offensive instincts. But when he's not doing that, I don't think he's very, I don't think he's very impactful when he's not scoring goals. He's got to learn to work on that. I think his skating is a step behind. I don't know that he's necessarily the most fleet of foot. He's going to have to work really hard on that. Out of the guys in this first round, I think he's probably the worst skater, I would say, of the top 32 I have ranked here. That doesn't mean he can't hang his own at the OHL level. He's clearly proven it with his offense. Great shot. Really good playmaker as well, like 84 points in 56 games, something crazy like that. 6'4", 210 pounds. The things that are really impressive about Ryan Rubrick are really impressive, but the things that are not so good about Ryan Rubrick are really not good. You're going to have some really strong strengths and some really bad flaws. And hopefully the really bad flaws can be fixed in order to really have him focus on his strong strengths, because a good skating Ryan Rubrick is probably a top 3 player in this class. But a Ryan Rubrick that doesn't have everything he needs to in order to be the most successful version of himself will probably be a guy who flirts with, being out of the top 10. I've had a mixed bag with him in viewings. I think he's had probably some of the best games I've seen out of this group, and also some of the worst games. And that's just how he rolls. So hopefully he can be a little more consistent. I think that's his main goal in this draft year, and hopefully get himself to being a more elite offensive talent, even more so than he already is. Going now, here we got the top 5. Ivar Stenberg got some time in the SHL this past year playing for Frölunda. Was rumored to come to North America. I think used that as a leverage. Was apparently rumored to play for Boston University, but it ended up not being the case. And he's found himself now being a regular in the Finland lineup. I think this year will be a very important year for him. I have him slated here in the top 5. Should he do really well at the SHL level, I think the top 3 is not out of question for Ivar. This is a hockey family through and through. Ivar has played a ton of really high-end hockey. One of the older players in this class, but just a ton of good skill. Only 3 points this year, but he was, in 25 games in Sweden for the SHL, but was really good at the junior level. For Lunda, he's going to come in this year and be one of their bigger players. I think he's got a super great development opportunity here to fit himself in the top 3 of this class. And, played super well at the U18s this past year, 13 points in 7 games, was probably Sweden's best player through that tournament. Is able to score in bunches once he gets hot. He really likes the international scene, it seems. Just recently, you look at his international performances, Hlinka Gretzky, 10 points in 5 games, the World Junior A Championships, the U19s, 11 points in 5 games. U18s this year, 13-7. World Hockey Championships for the under-17s, 10-7. This kid, he comes up in the big moments, and there's a lot to like with Ivar. I think there's really high-end skill with Ivar. Just gotta. Should he dominate the pro level, I think he's gonna find himself probably at 3. So we get a sip here real quick. And then we're going on to number 3 here. Number 4. Viggo Bjork. With Viggo Bjork, this is a kid who has been breaking records at the U18, U20 level in terms of scoring. You're not going to deny the offense with him. He's clearly somebody who could acclimate very easily to the pro level, in my opinion. I think could stand to be a little more creative, in terms of when he's backed into a corner. I think he's not as creative as he could be as a high-end scorer. But when he gets loose, he can shoot. And when he gets loose, he's more than likely going to score. And even if he doesn't score, he's able to find some really good playmaking opportunity to get his team offense. Again, a great system in Djurgårdens. They've really developed a ton of good prospects over the last couple of years. Ton to like with him. I think, he's going to probably use every opportunity he can to make himself pro ready. I think he should be playing at the pro level. I don't know how quickly he'll do that, but I think, he'll have some opportunity in the Allsvenskan. I think it's a good opportunity. Actually, I think, didn't they get promoted? I think Djurgårdens got promoted to the SHL, if I remember correctly. They did, yeah. So they won promotion. He's going to play in the SHL. Him and Stenberg are going to be right there with each other. And Hermansson's probably going to be a class behind them, which is why I have them ranked the way I do. But Viggo, to me, I think just is able to bring it offensively more consistently, and I think that's why I have him ranked here a little bit higher than Ivar. Smaller player, but skating I think is fine. I wouldn't say it needs massive amounts of improvement, but I think he could be somebody who would gain a lot by gaining a half step in his skating and being able to accelerate a little quicker. But great shot. Always finding ways to score. One of the best scorers in this draft. One of the best shots in this draft. Even one of the best playmakers in this draft. He just has a lot of super high-end attributes. And not somebody who I think will be fast-tracked to the National Hockey League, but I think he'll be somebody who will be thought of as being very likely a 70 to 80-point guy in the National Hockey League when it's all said and done. Number 3 here. So I think, if you're talking about gapping, I would say the gap I have another gap here after 10, and then I go 4 to 10, and then these top 3 here are my clear top 3. McKenna being in a class of his own. But number 3 here, we got Keaton Verhoff. I can talk for days about Keaton Verhoff. This is a guy who 6'4", 210 pounds, already going to be playing college hockey for North Dakota. I would expect him to be their top defenseman in North Dakota. Just watching this kid run the point in the Western Hockey League this year was an absolute treat. Played for the Victoria this year. Looked like he was a 20-year-old out there already at 16, just super gifted. Always made very calm but smart decisions. Awesome shot. There's not a thing wrong with this kid's game. I think, everybody hyped so much about Schaefer last year. Verhoff is twice the prospect Schaefer was. I think the world of Keaton Verhoff. I think he's the classic, physical defenseman that has a great offensive edge. NHL teams are going to be drooling over the floor to get this kid. Ellie Friedman's already given him some hype, putting him, saying he's just, somebody who, if Gavin McKenna was in this class, he would be a guy that would be seen as a, number one overall pick. I think he would have been ranked number one overall last year, no question. I think he, not in his current state, but I think, by the time this draft class rolls by and you show him where he's at in his current draft year and where Schaefer was in his current draft year, and Misa and Hagens and the like, I think he's going to be probably just under a point per game guy for North Dakota. And if he becomes that for them, you're looking at him. Levshunov was a guy who did the same thing. Owen Power. If he outproduces all those guys, you might have a debate here at one. And that's saying a lot, considering I love Gavin McKenna, and I think there's not a lot wrong with Gavin McKenna, but Keaton is another guy who he's a can't miss prospect. He's just an absolute treat to watch. No weaknesses in his game, just a fun watch as a hockey player, and any NHL team would love to have that kid. Number 2 here, this is a guy who I'm just betting purely on upside, Ethan Belchetz. He's been somebody who I don't think has produced nearly as much as I thought he would at the OHL level. I expected him, number one overall pick in his OHL draft year. Thought he'd be a kind of a point per game guy. Didn't find it really, but he's got a great system in Windsor, and honestly a team that's going to do really well in the next couple of years. I think with Ethan, you have a very, very unique talent. 6'6", 230 pounds, can skate incredibly well for his size, able to use his body really well. I think offensively, I look at this kid, I see a lot of Keith Primo. I see a lot of Eric Lindros. I don't think he's the talent level that a Lindros is, but a Keith Primo is certainly not out of reach for Ethan Belchetz. I have a hard time believing that he won't be a top 3 pick by when this is all said and done. I think scouts are going to be obsessed with this kid. Having the size, having the skill package, being offensively gifted, having the talent. There's nothing that scouts don't like about this kid. Unless there's some undiagnosed character issues I don't know about, I think this kid is tremendous. And NHL scouts will be falling over their table looking for this kid. I'm excited to get a little bit more views of him. But there's just an immense amount of potential with Ethan Belchetz, and I don't think he's even tapped the surface. And then finally, number 1, it's not even a debate for me, really. Maybe Verhoff, but not really. Gavin McKenna. I mean, I've heard about this kid since he was 13. Has been able to be a very, very impressive player at all levels. Just a ton of time for him. I think there's, a lot of offensive skill within this kid. Do I see him like a Connor Bedard or a Macklin Celebrini? I would say no. I would actually say that he's probably more of a Barzal plus, is what I would like to describe him as. When Barzal was in his draft year, people were concerned about his physical elements in his game. Gavin is a guy who's a little bit more slight of frame. Both guys, though, had skill in spades. Both guys could play make better than most people can do in the pros. Skating is super great from Gavin, one of the better skaters in this draft. I think like I said, he play makes better than probably any 16-year-old kid I've ever seen outside of Crosby and McDavid. Has scored at every level possible at very high-end levels of scoring. I so much to like about Mr. Gavin McKenna. I think he's just a force. I think you look at him and a lot of pressure was put on James Higgins last year to be a really high-end player. I don't think that was ever realistic for James Higgins, but I think expecting him to put up Eichel level production or Celebrini level production should be the expectation for Gavin McKenna at Penn State. They're going to give him the keys to everything offensively. He's going to have the opportunity to make that campus his. He's going to be an absolute force in the NCAA. I think out of this grouping, I think these top 3 players could all find themselves in the NHL by the time they're 20. I think with Gavin McKenna, he's the most likely to hit immediately in the NHL after his draft year. I think he will be somebody that will probably be a one and done at the NCAA level. If he's over 1.5 per game, I think he immediately steps into whatever NHL team selects him and becomes a 40, 50-point player from day one. Just a lot to like with Gavin. The only thing I would say is he needs to get a little more physically developed. I think there's a lot more to give with him in terms of should he get a bigger frame and, become a little bit stronger in his lower body. I think there's even that much more skating potential that could be unlocked with him. But God, the sky's the limit with this kid. One of the best prospects I've really caught eyes on in a very long time. And I can't see him being unseated here at 1. He's going to get an awesome opportunity at the World Juniors to be, a key cog for Canada, and, got the experience last year, got basically put into submission by the terrible coaching by Dave Cameron and staff. But, Gavin is a guy who I think the world of. I think he's a super, super good hockey player, and clearly will make the National Hockey League sooner rather than later. So then some surprises, I think, for, some publicly viewed people that I don't necessarily have in my first round. Some guys that I'll talk about real quickly. Chase Reed. I don't have a strong book on Chase, so I didn't feel comfortable ranking him in my first round because I need to get more views on him. So I would give him kind of a limited viewing ranking. Xavier Villanueva. He's, again, a guy who I don't understand why he's so highly ranked. I think he's a very gifted player in terms of his skill and his skating. But I think people are looking too much at the Lane Hudsons of the world, where they're more the exception than the norm. I don't think he's got the same high-end offensive flair that Lane Hudson had as a junior. I think he's a good player. I don't know that he's somebody who I would put in my first round. I would probably feel more comfortable with Xavier Villanueva in my second round. Just in what I see. I'm trying to think of some other guys. Those 2 in particular, I've seen in a lot of top 15s. I would say those 2, those are my thoughts on them. If you guys have any more comments, leave them on the side here. I'm going to give a couple minutes and, answer any questions. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit more about future videos that are going to be coming out too. Some of the videos I'm going to have coming out here, I'm going to start doing what's called Prospect Mondays. I'm going to take some clips of what I've done in previous live streams and some opinions I have on some players and throw them into short little reels. So I have some already queued up for about 4 or 5 different prospects in this 26 class. So I'm going to have those starting next Monday. They're going to be coming out random players, not necessarily by rank or anything like that. They're probably going to likely be a lot of first rounders to start, and then I'll get more into depth with some other guys later on throughout the year. So I'm going to try and keep to a pretty consistent schedule with that, and do my best to do what I can here, and having a lot of prospect coverage, more so than I did last year with the 25 class. Alexis Dubook says hi. What's up, Alexis? So hopefully you're still on here. I know you commented a while ago, but just too busy chatting and talking about the rest of the rankings here. I will do some more videos too on some future classes. I'll probably cover the 27, 28, 29 classes a little bit more in depth. I'll probably look for that in the next month or two. Again, if you guys have any last minute questions, do yourself a favor, please, leave them either as a comment after the video ends, or you could leave them in the live chat here in the next couple minutes while I stay on. A lot of people are thinking, like, what are some high-end goaltenders? Do you have anybody that you can see being a really high-end goaltender? I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so you guys can see here. If you guys want to see the rank, obviously I had them throughout the discussion earlier. My top ranked goalie right now, I got to look real quick, actually. I can't find him right now, but I will discuss a little bit more about the goalies if asked. If you guys have any more questions, do yourself a favor, please leave them in the comments after. I look at these all the time, so leave any video ideas you want me to do as well. I'm more than willing to do that and listen to them and talk more about these guys. And if you have any other questions, whether it's draft related, whether it's international hockey related, whatever you want to talk about, I'm here for. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and end it now. Thanks a lot for everybody that tuned in today. If you're watching a recording and you are new to the channel, please do yourself a favor. Please subscribe to the channel. Trying to get this to about 500 subscribers, hopefully by, at some point in time. I would like to get even towards 1,000 and really build this community out. So if you know any fellow prospect watchers, do yourself a favor. Please show them the video. Please, let them know about, my content and, keep the engagement going. I'm really excited to see what we're able to do with this community and how much more we can grow this thing. So with that being said, I'm going to log off. See you guys in the next video.